you were an advisor to, or sorry, not the advisor, but the pro bono manager to Jeff Fennick, the boxer.
Yes.
There's a movie coming out where there is an actor playing you in the movie.
Yes.
And what is interesting to me is that in a recent publication, Jeff said, Theo was very important to my career. He said, before Theo was involved, I was making $200,000 a fight or thereabouts. After Theo was involved, I was making $2 million a fight.
Yes.
What did you do differently? Today's podcast is brought to you by $1 Million Listing Sydney in collaboration with Core Studios. So Core, thank you for hosting this pod and for making this possible. And thank you to Theo for being here.
Thank you.
Fennick said in that publication that when he met you, he started making more money, not only when he was fighting, but beyond fighting.
Yes.
Were there investments that you tipped him into, property deals?
Look, I was, as his manager, I was also interested in seeing other ways that he could make money. And at the time, I remember I was offered a package of 25 houses for sale as a package in Surrey Hills. And just to amuse your listeners, the purchase price of the 25 houses was $4 million. I thought the best way I can assist Jeffrey and Johnny Lewis, who was his coach at the time, I thought I'd like to get them into property. So I said to the guys, look, I've got this opportunity to buy 25 houses. I'd like you guys to buy 5 each, and I'll buy the 15.
Right.
I didn't do it because I needed help to buying the 25. I just thought it would be a way of getting them into the property industry. So they each bought 5 terraces for $800,000.
Wow. What year was this?
Look, I just don't remember the calendar year, but suffice to say, I'd say those 5 terraces would be worth about $8 to $10 million today. And just as amusingly, I know Johnny Lewis still owns all 5. Good on you, Johnny.
Okay, so Theo, you're obviously a property investor.
Yes.
Where do you see the Australian market or Sydney market going?
I'm comfortable with
Sydney.
I'm comfortable with housing, with houses. I'm uncomfortable with apartments.
What gives you uncomfort about apartments?
I have always remembered what I was told many years ago by a farmer. He said to me, the reason land keeps going up is because they're not making any more of it. And I agree with that. However, the reality is they are making more and more home units. And so consequently, what we've found now, consequent upon particularly the Minns government, recent changes to housing, that the supply side of the equation has far, far fewer barriers than it's ever had before. And that every day when I open up the papers, I read about a new development for 500 units, 2,000 units, everywhere. So the supply side of the equation, particularly for units, is exploding. I believe that is going to have a very negative impact on the market across the board.
The apartment market.
The apartment market across the board over the next 5 to 10 years.
So you think there's an oversupply and demand will not meet that supply?
I answer that by reference to an example. I read an article recently that home unit prices in Parramatta in the last 5 years have actually fallen, and that should be a danger sign for everybody. I believe that people have to ask themselves the question, which is this. The state government publishes, and it's on their website today, that there's a shortage of housing, for example, in Sydney. And so the question I ask myself, and perhaps your listeners, is if there's a shortage of people, of housing for people, where are those people living today? I mean, yes, we all know there's some homeless in the street, but the number hasn't increased.
So where do you think they're living today? Because we know in the future there's going to be a lot of apartments, so in the future they'll probably be in those apartments, but today?
Not necessarily. I think the answer to that is slightly different. I believe that the shortage of housing does not mean people are living on the street, but I think you're getting more and more situations where you're having multiple generations living in the one home. In other words, kids are not leaving home early. Sometimes you've even got grandkids living in the same house.
Right.
And so ultimately, there's a shortage of housing, yes, but I believe the shortage of housing is only in the low-cost housing. That is the cheaper to buy and cheaper to rent housing. And that the reality is that shortage is not the one that's being addressed by developers at the moment. Even the most recent Glebe Island announcement by the state government, where they're saying we're building housing there to address the shortage, only 15% of the Glebe Island development is going to be low-cost housing. I mean, that's hypocritical by means. The reality is 50% of that development should be low-cost housing if he's genuinely concerned about the lack of low-cost housing. With regard to all the other housing that's being built, for example, in Rose Bay, people are pulling down 3 houses and building 30 home units. That's not relevant to low-cost housing. And to turn around and say these developers are having to provide 15% of their site for low-cost housing, that's insignificant, completely insignificant relative to the amount of demand for low-cost housing.
So if you were Chris Minns,
Yes.
what would you be doing to sort this out?
Yeah, look, whenever I was giving owners a windfall gain by, for example, rezoning, or by, for example, announcing a new railway station hub, and therefore upvaluing the value of land around that new hub, I would charge them for it. I would charge the owners a premium for what's just happened.
Right.
And that premium be used by government as a revenue source, not to put into the general coffers, but to say all of this money is going to be used by us to build low-cost accommodation owned in perpetuity by the state government. So the state government would be developing an asset long-term, and also it would be addressing the problem most specifically. This idea, as you may know, the bonus being offered by the state government under planning controls now, which is that we will give you an uplift in height and FSR in exchange for 15% of the development being for low cost. That low cost is only for a limited period, 10 to 15 years. All that doing is shifting the problem out 15 years. The reality is there needs to be a permanent solution, and the permanent solution is the government becomes a build-to-renter using developer or owner money.
So you would charge the owner or the developer a surplus amount or some sort of charge.
A charge, yeah.
To allow them to, build to a higher level.
Correct. But if you want to build to a high level, you give us money, and with that money, we're going to build and own low-cost accommodation.
Right. So the government's effectively a landlord. They're getting rental income. They've now got an asset. And, okay, that stacks up. That's interesting.
Just a thought, Mr. Minns. There are alternatives, and I really believe what's happening now is all you're doing is lining developers' pockets, but not addressing the low-cost housing problem.
Where would you, if you were the government, where would you be building those affordable homes or units?
Common sense planning means that they need to be evenly spread throughout Sydney.
Sure. Is there a particular location in Sydney, maybe where there's a lot of land, but it's a bit further away from the city?
Look, the reality is it needs to be near a transport hub. Like in the olden days before the metro, far away meant a long cab ride or drive to Sydney.
Yeah.
Into the CBD, for example. But now the metro, it's a fantastic asset. It's the best infrastructure development that Sydney's ever seen. But it doesn't address the number one problem, which is housing shortage for low cost.
So on this point, you have, and it was recently published in the news, that you have a site in Alexandria. Initially, it was destined to be an office tower that was no longer viable to you.
Correct.
So you pivoted to residential. Then residential you felt was no longer viable, and you moved it to student accommodation where you could get more rooms versus the apartments.
Right.
What's the logic behind that?
No, I've got a site well located between Sydney Metro at Waterloo and Green Square Railway Station. I had originally contemplated it as an office, but that was pre-COVID.
Yeah, right.
COVID changed my attitude to office space permanently. I then contemplated simply a build to rent, but I have somewhat panicked by the massive increase in supply that's coming of residential apartments. And so I decided to build not student accommodation but co-living.
Co-living, okay.
And I'm building effectively 250 studio apartments.
Yes.
The smallest of which is 26 square metres, the smallest of which is substantially bigger than the average student accommodation room, which is 17 square metres. The idea I have is that if you build a bigger room, then it can suit a couple, and therefore whatever the rent is effectively divided by two, as opposed to a 17 square metre room, which generally will only accommodate one person.
I'm gathering that you're not necessarily optimistic on the apartment market.
Pessimistic.
Generally, so you're pessimistic. Are there any apartments that you think will have a bright future in terms of value?
Oh, look, I'm sure a lot of real estate agents will say Theo's wrong. As long as it's in a AAA location, it will always appreciate. The reality is there are quite a few AAA locations, and therefore even apartments in the AAA locations are not going to have the benefit of any substantial capital increase, in my opinion, in the foreseeable future.
So there's obviously a lot of apartments going up. How do you think these developers will make money if the future does not look bright, in your opinion?
Well, it seems to me that those that have made money before today have done well, but those that are starting off today may be in jeopardy. Famous line by Sir James Goldsmith: if you can see a bandwagon, it's too late to get on it.
Yes.
And there seems to be a bandwagon now with luxury accommodation developments.
What about housing? What's your view on houses?
I'm comfortable with housing because there's a limited supply of housing in established locations, i.e. Within 8 kilometres of the CBD. Housing in the outer west is an unlimited supply commodity. I'm super bearish on that as well. The reality is I'm a great believer in climate change, and that it seems to me that it's getting hotter and hotter. I know when I drive to my farm on the weekend, when I drive through Campbelltown, that there's been, if I leave home and it's 28 degrees in the eastern suburbs, it's 35 degrees in Campbelltown.
Right.
And I remember when my son used to row at the Penrith Regatta Centre, that they call off the regatta if temperature reaches 42 degrees Celsius.
Right.
And I remember towards the end of his rowing career, regattas were called off more and more often because we were breaking the 42 degrees. Now, for my purposes, living in an area where it is so hot is not desirable. One of my favourite things to do is go for a walk. And I do not walk when it's 42 degrees. It's just too hot for me.
One thing you've said to me before, and I've thought about it, but it may not be that deep, is that walking is one of the greatest pleasures in life. Why is that?
Well, not everybody will necessarily agree with me for that, but there's always things to see. People watching is fun. Watching other people walk around is a form of social intercourse, and ultimately being aware of what's around you, etc., is a fun thing to do. Plus, we all know it's good exercise.
Well, when I walk around and I see the properties that we've been advertising, all I've ever noticed, and this is at least my opinion, I've only ever noticed the market increasing in the 12 years I've had my business, for example. So do you think that increase, it's a macro view of just the property market increases? Do you, now you think apartments will not be part of that growth, but the houses, is there a particular type of house in a particular suburb, like is it waterfronts that you think may appreciate because there's a rarity, they're not making any more waterfronts? Or is there Bellevue Hill, like are there particular areas you are optimistic about?
Well, so you've been walking around looking at real estate for 12 years.
Yep.
But the reality is I'm confident that you have had the benefit of seeing the market pre-mins, and now I'm really talking about the market post-mins. Yes, of course, I'm confident in waterfronts because they are truly not making any more of them. A waterfront house, they're not making more of. Waterfront home units, they are making more of. So I am confident. Also, I'm confident in the very, very high value houses because every day I open the newspaper and there seems to be a new technology billionaire. And I'd like to say that if you're not a billionaire yourself, then it's a good idea to own an asset that a billionaire is going to want to buy off you.
And a waterfront could be one of those.
Because he'll pay you a premium to buy it.
Sure. If they want it, they'll pay anything to get it.
If you've made your money that easily, you don't mind parting with a bit extra.
That's your view in the Australian market. Outside of Australia, what country would you invest in outside of Australia?
I particularly like Switzerland.
Yes.
For many reasons, which would take too long to get into. I particularly like Aspen, Colorado as well.
Which you've purchased property in Aspen?
Yes.
And you're optimistic about the growth of Aspen, or you just enjoy it as a leisurely destination?
No, I find Aspen one of the truly unique real estate markets in the world. Despite the pressures, there's still the 3-story height limit.
Okay.
Which I think doesn't apply anywhere else,
yeah.
Despite the pressures. Interestingly, Restorations Hardware, and we know there's been a store being built in Double Bay for them. They're in the process of building a store for themselves in Aspen, Colorado, and they paid a fortune for the site, but the building is 1.5 stories. That is just indicative as to how hard it is to build a building in Aspen, Colorado.
Yes.
What I find interesting about their market is that to avoid disturbing the residents, there's only about 3 permits given every year to demolish a house there to build a new house. So unlike us in the eastern suburbs that have got cranes everywhere and trucks everywhere, they are protecting their residents by only allowing a limited number of houses demolished every year. Also, it's one of those interesting markets where if I wanted to buy the condominium next to my condominium and merge it and create a big condominium, the local council's attitude is, yes, you can do that, but you need to buy and gift to us a rental apartment in Aspen. And so they're saying, we have no interest in wealthy people making it more and more luxurious to people and having less residents in Aspen. We're happy for you to do it, but you have to buy a unit and give it to us, the council, which they then lease to staff. They've got a wonderful staff leasing policy there. And relative to what we were saying earlier, the council there is about to build 40 apartments in Basalt for staff, for the lift workers, the ski instructors, the shop workers, etc.
Yes.
And so that height limit restriction means it is really and utterly no increase in supply.
Yes.
And that is the direct opposite to Mins.
Yes.
But Mins should take notice of their concept of not being able to buy the unit next door without effectively giving a unit to the council.
Yes.
A lot to be learnt there.
So a lot to be learnt. So, okay.
Also, by the way, I like that area for another reason, which is the same reason I love Barrel, is that it's easier to warm up than it is to cool down. And what I mean by that is, in summer, it never really gets beyond 25 degrees Celsius in summer in Aspen. And sure, it's colder in winter, but nothing a jacket doesn't overcome. And the same applies to Barrel, which is an area I love, and where my farm home is, which is that ultimately, because it's at altitude, it's at 700 metres, and ultimately you can work on 1 degree of heat per 100 metres of altitude. So we're 700 metres, so we are 7 degrees cooler than Campbelltown. And you can see that again as you're driving south. And so all of these people going to Campbelltown and Penrith and the Sydney airport, would you rather be there where it's 42 degrees, or would you rather being 7 degrees cooler and 35 degrees in Barrel?
So I'm noticing 2 key themes. There's supply, as to your formula for growth or theories.
Yeah.
Supply and temperature at this stage.
Look, I'm sure you're going to interview a lot smarter people and a lot more successful people than me. But looking at it from my point of view, the increase in supply must have consequences.
And
negative consequences for existing product. Also, people are paying a premium for new product, which as soon as they pay it and they move in, they need to know that premium will be gone. With regard to temperature, global warming is happening, and I'm really interested in comfort, and I find it just so hard to cool down when it's too hot.
Yes. And you mentioned Bowral. There is a similarity between Bowral and Aspen. You obviously love Aspen, and you've also bought in Bowral within Australia, within New South Wales. What was it about Bowral at the time? Actually, how old were you when you purchased your place in Bowral or your farm in Bowral?
I was about 32 years of age.
32.
I think I was 32, I'm thinking.
Okay.
Yep.
And why? What prompted you to purchase in Bowral compared to, say, Palm Beach or other secondary home type places that, in my mind, there?
Look, it may be because my father was a goat herder in Cyprus, but ultimately I was attracted to the rural lifestyle rather than the beach. But also, I believe that owning acreage that you control is much better than buying a beachfront that is cheek to jowl with other houses. And if I've got a beachfront, hypothetically at Palm Beach, and the dog next door is barking, nothing I can do about it. And if I've got horrible neighbours next door, there's nothing I can do about it other than sell. Okay, but in Bowral, I have no neighbours that I can see or hear, and I love that aspect of it.
Yes. So, okay, the cattle business, well, we're talking about the farm. It's obviously there's a property aspect, which is a consistent thing.
Yes.
There's a lot of property plays.
Yes.
But there's also, you run it as an operation too, as a leisurely place, but you also have
It's a
cattle,
business.
which you farm, which is a business. When you were 32, was it a cattle farm when you first purchased it, or was it more a leisurely purchase?
Existing cattle farm, which I've bought out a number of neighbours, and it's bigger, much bigger.
Did you have experience in cattle farming, or it's just...
No.
And what made you get into cattle farming? Did you see it as a future growth
It
play?
was an investment decision. My parents being migrants, they, and being off the land, and my father being a goat herder, they used to take me as a child to the Sydney Royal Show. We were living in Paddington in the first 5 years of my life, and they took me to the show, and I used to go into the cattle pavilions in a pram, in reality, and I used to just find that just mesmerising and wonderful. And what's funny is I see kids walking into the cattle pavilion at the show and lots of them say, "Ooh, the smell's terrible," whereas I walk in there and I think, "Oh, this is a beautiful odour." And I find cattle a beautiful animal. And if they hadn't been domesticated, and you were in Africa and you saw a black Angus bull, you'd say, "Wow, look at that animal! How beautiful it is." But people take them for granted now because they've effectively been farmed. But I don't take them for granted. And
what's interesting is that you don't actually. There's no abattoirs, so you don't actually sell them as
No,
meat
we breed. We sell breeding stock.
Sell breeding stock.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Because ultimately, the higher the quality of the animal, then it's more valuable alive than dead, and I enjoy breeding the higher quality animal. And meanwhile, thank you for wearing a KO Angus shirt in support of KO Angus.
KO Angus is his starter, and we've got MDLS on the back. It's a nice brand collaboration. So why is it worth more alive than dead?
Because they're high quality genetics and they can be used by other cattle breeders to improve the quality of their herd.
Okay. What do you love about $1 Million Listing Sydney?
We as a nation seem to be property obsessed. And for me, I am also one of the many that are property obsessed, and it's interesting to see what's selling and what it looks like on the inside.
Yes.
So it's like in the olden days, people used to buy home magazines and have to pay for a magazine to see what a house looks like. Now it's all for free, thanks to you.
Where are your favourite places to holiday, summer and winter?
Switzerland, Aspen.
Switzerland in the summer and Aspen winter?
No, funnily enough,
yeah.
No, I think that it will surprise people, I'm sure, that Aspen, Colorado hotel room rates are higher in summer than they are in winter.
Yeah. It's beautiful in summer.
Yeah.
Best suburb to live in?
Elizabeth Bay.
Street? What's the best street in Elizabeth Bay?
I'm biased, but Billiard Avenue.
Who is someone that you admire?
Nick Pilatus.
Why?
Nick is the true success story. He's one of the most successful business people I've ever seen. I love his passion at his work, and I love his passion at his sport.
So Nick
Of
Pilatus,
choice.
he's the owner of the Roosters, but he's also a car dealer.
Yeah, no, yes, correct.
Right.
No,
So what about that business what about it do you admire that he's done in that space?
I love how single-minded he is about his business.
Yep.
He's never effectively come away from his basic strategy. I mean, your older listeners or viewers will know things like when Westfield was successful, controlled by the Lowy family, Frank decided he would diversify and go and buy Channel 10,
Right.
which proved to be a bad mistake. Nick has stuck to his knitting and been incredibly successful and is as far as I'm concerned, one of the great success stories of Australia.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
So, and that's, I want to understand more about what he did differently, and there's more a question for him, but what did he do differently compared to other car dealers, but that made him who he is? You're saying he stuck to what he was good at, he fertilised his most fertile ground, as you would say,
Yes.
as a farmer. But what about, you mentioned his strategy, what was it about the strategy that you liked?
It was just so single-minded. That's in summary, he's single-minded.
So just expanding car dealerships, purchasing more cars, but he would also purchase the properties too, is my understanding.
Nick is a very, very substantial property person in the country. I look forward to you interviewing him, and it'll be a great podcast.
Well, often the properties are worth more than the business nowadays.
Well,
not speaking for him, but just generally.
the reality is that a car business, if you own the property and the business, then you're really taking advantage of your property ownership. People that make a success of that do very, very well. I mean, I think Justin Hemmers is another example where I think he's making money out of selling you a beer, but he's making more money by making the property he has purchased a success.
Sure. So you think that instead of purchasing a property and collecting a rental yield from a separate tenant, purchasing the property and actually operating a business within there can generate a greater return?
Very, very much so. If you've got a business to put in a property, then buying it rather than renting it is a very simple no-brainer.
Well, you can have a situation where instead of buying on a rental yield of 4-5%, call it, if you have a great business in there, you could arguably get a 50% return if you smash it.
We agree.
Yep. I'll ask you this, favourite architect?
Depends on the type of development.
Yeah, like a luxury residential house.
Look, I'm doing a development at the moment designed by Chinchard Little, and as we're getting closer to completion, I'm loving it more and more, and Tony did a great job.
Yep. Whereas you think for larger apartment developments, it's not necessarily about the architectural creativity of the building, but it's more about optimising space and because Chenchow Little's obviously a creative guy.
You're very creative.
But does that creativity have a place in a student accommodation site? Or?
No. It's horses for courses.
Yep.
And so it's all very, very different. I would not use Tony for anything other than super luxury development.
Sure. Okay, what was your best property deal that you've ever done?
Look, there's been a number of good ones, but I remember there was a row of terraces for sale in Redfern a long time ago, and they were auctioning them one after another. And I went there with the intention of buying the whole row, and I bought the first one, and then which happened to be the best one, which was north-facing corner, and then the next terrace came up and went for much more than my budget. And then the next one went for more again. And then by the time we got to the fourth one, prices had increased substantially. And so I thought, well, I wanted to own the whole row. I don't want just one. So I went over to the auctioneers and I said, when you finish auctioning number 8, I want you to re-offer number 1, which was my terrace.
Sure.
With me as the vendor. And they said, oh, you sure you want to do that? I said, yes. That's what we do. And so we arranged, we quickly drew up pieces of paper and signed it off, and then whilst the other auctions were proceeding, and then he announced it on the market. And then he sold number 8, and then announced that I was selling number 1 again.
In the moment at the auction?
At the same auction, same people were there. So the reaction was a lot of booing in the room.
Right.
Truly, it
Well,
was
why?
quite hostile, because they thought I was being opportunistic.
Sure.
And so the auctioneer opened the bidding, and people were not bidding, and people were resisting. But then ultimately, after a few minutes of no bids, he persisted. There was a bid made, and the bid was exactly what I'd paid for it. And then again, after quite a delay, someone else bid again. Anyway, one thing led to another. It became a very heated auction, and I sold my terrace for 40% more than I bought it 1 hour earlier.
Wow.
And so that was a very handy return on capital. But it also says this: you can be sure from a human behaviour point of view, if there's two items coming up for sale, that a lot of people will think, I don't need to buy the first one because I've got a second chance. But you please observe, nearly always, and I would say 99% of the time, the second one sells for more than the first one. Because after the first one has sold, the second one is the last opportunity. And so that was a good buy. The 25 houses that I shared with John Lewis and Jeff Fennick were a great opportunity. The guy was in trouble, needed to sell 25 immediately.
Yeah.
That was great. Another building, Shannon Whitney sold to me. We couldn't get in, but it had to be sold.
It was uninhabitable?
No, we couldn't get in because the tenant was hostile.
Oh, right, okay.
We couldn't get in. I met Shannon out the front of the building, looked at it from the front, and I said, yeah, I'll buy it.
And how did you know that it was a good deal? Just having not inspected the property?
At the price that I'd agreed, I was safe. But this was a reflection of a very tight vendor with a very difficult tenant.
What suburb was that?
Darlinghurst.
So you had sufficient market knowledge?
Oh yeah, no, it was,
you knew your numbers.
Correct. No, I could see what it looked like from above, and I formed a view of what it was like.
And what was your worst property deal?
Look, I thought, after a number of years of doing this, I thought, geez, I'm good at this. And I thought, I'm going to go down to Melbourne and start doing this as well. So I went down and I started buying property in South Yarra. And anyway, whilst I didn't lose money in my developments down there, what I did learn was the idea that I could go to Melbourne and buy better than the locals was an idiotic idea. I mean, I was at an auction down there, I'm competing with the locals. Of course the locals know better than me.
So it's a market knowledge.
Market knowledge. And so I believe I had excellent market knowledge in the inner city. Like in the olden days before $1 million listings and all everything else, if I looked at a real estate agent's window and I saw a photo of a house for sale in Surrey Hills, they didn't need to provide the address of that house. I knew exactly where it was because I'd walked the suburbs so thoroughly, I knew where everything was. I also remember a time where I went to a house. A real estate agent took me to a house. He said, are you sure you want to go inside? Because he thought it was horrendously overpriced. There was a house in Crown Street, Surrey Hills. It was $55,000. I remember it well. And he said to me, "Oh, you sure you want to go inside?" And I said, "Yeah, let's go." And as soon as he opened the door, I thought, "You're a moron." And and of course I bought it. And it was a great deal. So ultimately, to be a success, you need to know the market better than the real estate agent trying to sell it to you.
Yes.
Because generally speaking, most of the buyers that are making good money in property are more successful than the real estate agents.
How were you staying up to date with the market back then when there was no $1 million listings and the publicity of everything?
Yeah, one thing that I would do to keep up with the market, which I think seldom people do, but I advise people to do it, is I would look at not only the for sale columns in the Sydney Morning Herald on Saturday morning, but I would look at the for rent.
Yes.
And that ultimately the rental market is going to be a strong indicator of what's happening in a suburb.
Sure.
I mean, I bought into Surrey Hills. The first house I ever bought was in Surrey Hills. It was in Burke Street. I think I paid $32,000 for it.
Wow.
But Why did I buy there? Because it was clear that it was being gentrified by the gays, which is 2 income, no children.
Yes.
And they were doing a great job
Yes.
gentrifying it.
Yes.
And so I thought I need to know this suburb.
And you were bullish on it for that gentrification reason.
Definitely. Well, let alone the fact that it's close proximity.
Yeah.
I mean, that leads me to something that I've always loved is walkability.
Yes.
And so if you've got a number of home units for sale in Potts Point, and people say to me, but it doesn't have parking. If you live in Potts Point, you don't need parking. But also, if you think about the second most expensive thing in your life, after hypothetically rent, if you're renting, is your car. And if you can ditch the car by being in a central location, then you're saving a fortune. And if you can build, like I've built in suburbs where it was so walkable that a family, instead of having 2 cars, would have 1 car. And because I was saving money on the second car, they were able to pay me much more rent.
Great. You were also well known for your creation of the intersection Paddington, or your curation of the properties there. It's a collection of how many properties are in the intersection
There's
now?
30 shops.
There's 30 shops. When you bought your first shop or terrace there and maybe converted it into a shop, did you have a vision of making this whole area an Australian shopping district?
Yes, I did. I was in the fashion industry at the time. I co-owned Marks, and I co-owned Diesel in Australia.
Yes.
So I was in the retail fashion industry, and I thought I'd rather be the landlord than the tenant. When I was in London, I visited an area called Brompton Cross, which was the centre of English fashion. It's where all the English designers were located, near one another, and it made it the coolest part of London. And I thought, wow, Brompton Cross is seriously cool. I thought, I can do this in Australia, and you'll obviously see the coincidence between Brompton Cross and the intersection.
Yes.
The names. And so I thought I can do this. At the time, the most expensive part of Paddington was up near Paddington Markets. And the bad part of Oxford Street was the part in Glenmore Road, which is where the intersection is located now.
Sure.
I thought I can turn this area into the best part of Oxford Street for many reasons, not the least of which is how attractive the Victoria Barracks is, which is directly across the road. And also by not having shops on both sides of the street, it meant that parking for patrons of my precinct were going to find it easier to park because there was less shops.
Sure.
And so I thought I can do this. And there's a collector mentality in my brain, and so I collected buildings in the area and then started marketing it as its own precinct.
And the intersection is well known for only having Australian only brands.
Yes.
The logic behind that is that when you went to Brompton, you saw that they were English brands, and you thought we need a district for
Correct.
Australian
Well, funny.
brands.
Thank you for asking that for this reason, that Brompton Cross has failed now.
Okay.
And it's failed for a simple reason, which is that it's not all owned by one person.
Sure.
And that in response to the popularity of the area, individual landlords would say, I'm not going to lease to an English designer. This French designer is offering me more money. And so what happened is, slowly but surely, Brompton Cross simply became an international designer centre, where I think the first shop to go there was an Yves Saint Laurent. It's now got Yves Saint Laurent, it's got Chanel, but ultimately it's just another shopping centre now of international brands.
Sure.
Which is not that special. And so even though I believe I could substantially increase my total rental income at the intersection Paddington by going international, I believe I would jeopardise the whole concept. And so I've stuck to it, and I'm proud of it, and I'm very happy with it.
So you've had, no doubt, greater rental offers from non-Australian brands, but you've remained faithful to the Australian-only element of it. Who was the first tenant there?
My first tenant there was 2, simultaneously, Zimmerman and Scanlon and Theodore.
Yeah, and both extremely successful.
Both still there, obviously.
Both still there.
Over 2 decades later.
Yes.
And we're about to expand the Zimmerman store substantially.
Great. Now, obviously, Intersection has been successful, but was there ever a period when you're buying these properties that you think this actually may not work out?
Firstly, they started building Westfield Bondi Junction. And what Westfield did is that they came to Oxford Street and they approached every tenant, every fashion tenant, and said, come to Westfield Bondi Junction. And so it stripped out about 20% of the tenants in the street, left and went to Westfield. And we got to a vacancy factor of about 20%. So that was of enormous concern.
Yep.
Suffice to say, the labels that went to Westfield were suited to Westfield because they were homogenous type fashion brands that had 50 stores anyway, and that the loss of those stores to Westfield didn't harm Oxford Street because their replacements were the more unique fashion type stores.
Sure.
Although it did take time for the fill in. So then, after that, they announced the expansion of Westfield in the CBD. And so, again, the same thing happened, and the intersection Paddington was effectively bookended by Westfield Bondi Junction and Westfield in the CBD. Again, that had a detrimental impact. But the good news is that the labels that left were the ones that were better suited to a mall, to a shopping mall.
Yes.
And they were replaced by stores that were not homogenous McFashion, as I call them.
McFashion, yep.
And so ultimately, the street benefited.
Yes.
Then the internet reared its ugly head in some ways, and that it represented a threat to fashion retailers as well. But I think that what's happened is the fashion industry has digested it and realised the most profitable way to run it is to have a few stores, not many stores, plus online.
Yes.
And so ultimately, I think that Oxford Street Paddington is stronger now than it's ever been, having weathered those three storms. And people have realised, or young fashion people have realised, maybe I'm better off having just one store in a good location, plus online.
Sure. And it's more efficient too, less rents.
Correct.
One great flagship store.
Yeah, and people are using it effectively as a showroom. And so the retailers, and so what I believe is the best fashion model is that returns by online customers are becoming more and more expensive.
Yep.
And so you generally on a sale and return, and if you've got a big percentage of your sales as returns, that really impacts the profitability of a fashion business or any business. But if you can say to people, to your customers, if you return to store, we will give you a credit of some amount of money, then you save, even if you give a $10 credit, if you save $20 on the cost of the return, the reality is you've got them into your shop and you've got an opportunity to sell them something else.
Yes.
And so to me, people have realised that that's what's happened, and that therefore AAA quality retail locations are only increasing in value, although the B retail locations are decreasing in value.
Well, and even just for me, I can't remember the last time I've been to a Westfield, but I go to the intersection all the time, and that outdoor shopping experience is just better.
So I believe I coined the phrase, and I claim it, which is Sydney is a city to be enjoyed outdoors.
Yes. Not in the aircon.
I certainly get Westfield in New York in the middle of winter, and I certainly get Westfield in the middle of New York in the middle of summer.
Yes.
And the same with Westfield London. But the reality is Sydney, particularly close to the coast, with convection currents, etc., is a city you can enjoy all year round.
Yes.
By being outside.
So we were talking previously about how you are not necessarily optimistic about the future growth of apartments, say,
yes,
in terms of their sale value. You're not a seller, however,
yes,
so that may not affect you. You're a build-to-renter,
yes,
effectively. Talk to me about that. Do you find that's more profitable, or do you regret selling it? You think, you know what, I wish I just never sold that. Is it more of I just want to keep the thing I built, or do you actually think it's just more viable from a business perspective?
Look, historically, I've been a build-to-renter, and I've been doing it for 40 years, which is longer than the terms existed. But I was happy to do it because I won a reasonable rental return, and two, expectation of capital growth. The fact is that everybody's pouring into build to rent now. Again, I go back to the bandwagon theory, which is it's too late to get on, I have little or no interest in building apartments now because I don't believe that there'll be substantial rental growth or substantial capital growth. I accept that building 250 studio apartments may seem inconsistent with that, but I don't believe it is, because ultimately, I personally would rather live by myself in a luxurious 26 square metre apartment than have a room in a 3-bedroom rental apartment.
Yep.
And provided that 26 square metre is comfortable, that's where I'd rather live.
Yeah. So what projects are you working on at the moment? How many do you have going on?
We're building 3 at the moment, and planning others.
And all of those are built to rent?
Everything's built to rent.
Obviously a property investor, but you've been involved in other things such as cattle. You're a barrister, but you also had a bar in Randwick with Malcolm Turnbull. Is my understanding you co-owned a bar together?
Yes.
How did that come about?
Malcolm and I were friends. It goes back, and yes, we did own and operate a restaurant in Randwick. Malcolm and I, called Randy Wicks.
How old were you guys at the time?
We were both in our early 20s.
Okay.
Yep. However, I'm going to go back to what I'd said to you earlier. We own the property.
Yes.
Which is, so from our point of view, we were not restaurateurs, we were real estate owners, and we were looking to maximise the return on the property, which ties into what I'd said to you earlier.
Yes.
About property ownership in circumstances where you own the business occupying it is just such a no-brainer.
Yeah.
And it's what has helped Nick Politis, it's helped Justin Hemies, it's helped a lot of people. And as I said, I look forward to Nick and Justin coming onto your podcast and hearing their attitude.
And you didn't expand bars with Malcolm, probably because you were both lawyers at the time, I presume, and super busy.
Yeah, no.
And so it wasn't.
Well, also what we learnt was that it was hard to, the amount of time required to run these things in circumstances where it was a sideline for us didn't make sense.
Yeah.
I get it when it's your main income source, as in Justin, but owning one restaurant bar was not sensible.
Yeah. Justin has that ability, he can activate a space that has not been active. Like, he's done that on a major scale, and he's turned, for example, the recent Rose Bay site from a ghost town effectively into the busiest place in Sydney. So he's got that ability to not only buy the property, but he activates them on a large scale.
I so look forward to hearing Justin's interview with you in future. But at the end of the day, one of the many things he gets right is his design.
Yeah.
His design is better than most. Secondly, he has his own following now, but I think it's a reflection on his design, the quality of his team. And if I can talk about that briefly, which is that I believe that one of the reasons that Nick's been successful, Nick Politis going backwards, is that if you're an expanding business and you've got really great staff members and you've got a 2IC, a second in charge in a dealership, and that 2IC sees no opportunity ever of becoming the in charge of a dealership, then he'll think, I'm going to leave Nick and go and work for someone else. But if you're working for Nick Politis, you'll think, yeah, I'm 2IC, but I know that if Nick buys the next dealership that Nick buys, I know that he'll put me in there as the boss.
Yes.
And so you don't lose your best people.
Sure.
If you're expanding the opportunities for your staff to grow with you.
Yep.
If you're contracting, the opposite occurs. If you're stationary, the opposite occurs. But what Justin, I'm guessing, but I look forward to you interviewing both of these guys, is that his staff are one of his great go-assets.
Yep.
And that they know by being in an expanding business, they're going to get an opportunity to expand themselves and improve themselves and go into a higher and higher position.
Yep. It's interesting. keeping your good people motivated by giving them things like autonomy over a venue or cutting them in equity-wise. The incentive or the motivator is a key thing, and it's what I'm trying to work out with my growth as well. So keeping your key people but keeping them motivated
Very hard.
is difficult, but it's arguably the key to growing.
Definitely.
What's your most favourite thing about $1 Million Listing Sydney?
Oh, well, it's visual and it's free.
Not only is it free though, you subscribe to the page and it presents to you properties that you may not have inspected, otherwise you may not have searched for them, because I know you've inspected things outside of your general core area because you saw it and you think, oh, that seems like it's priced
Yes,
well.
I'm surprised how often I see images. I think, wow. Now, and I search it, and certainly it exists, but it's $1 Million Listings that's shown me that it exists.
Yes.
And so I may not be looking for it, but I found it. And so I think that one of the big advantages you have in your business is you're providing to the market an opportunity to buy something they weren't looking for. If my objectives are to buy a house in a particular location, then generally you may be missing out on something that's better but in an alternate location.
Exactly.
And so you're taking them on a journey.
Yes.
And that journey shows them different areas that you did not even contemplate, but all of a sudden you contemplate it.
Yes.
I mean, I've seen a number of properties, I thought, wow, maybe I'm prepared to buy that.
Yeah. And that's the beautiful thing about it. And the images, I think, is the key to presenting the property and advertising. Obviously, being on the right platform, such as us, with a real following and getting the engagement.
Yes.
But also the content itself, and Core, who is hosting this podcast, which I'm very grateful for, they do most of the images that are on our page. And I reckon that's, obviously, as you referred to, the imagery is so important, and they do a great job at it.
Look, if I was a real estate agent and I wanted to target a market, then I'd be targeting someone that's interested in property. And if someone's bothered to become a subscriber to yours, then they are your target market because they're interested in property.
Totally.
They're not subscribing to you because they collect cars. They're not subscribing to you because they're wanting to go on overseas holiday.
Yep.
They're subscribing to you because they're interested in property.
Well, more and more agents are saying that the buyers are coming from the page.
Yeah,
or they're followers of the page, or they've inspected it from the page. Yeah. And it's funny because we've got an older audience, but there's also a younger audience who may not be, who there's a lot of successful young people who are buyers, but they may be a buyer also in 2-3 years' time.
Yes.
And they've subscribed to a page 2 years ago, may not be ready to buy yet, but 2 years goes fast and they're ready to go, and they're eventually a buyer.
Well, you may remember I said to you about my bad experiences buying in South Yarra.
Yes.
Ultimately, and what I said to you was that you need to educate yourself. To participate in the real estate industry successfully, you need to be very well educated. And your page is part of the education process, which is very, very convenient.
And you referred to, the most important parts. Obviously look at the for sale column in the articles, but also look at the for rent.
Yeah.
But for me, I love looking at the sold and what things have sold for, because that's the truthful data.
Funny enough, you're right. Sorry, you're right. It's sold is much more relevant than for sale. And much more relevant.
Yes, and that's what we're always committed to, delivering all the sold prices and the current sales in the area. So, and people love it.
Yes, I understand and agree.
And it also shows with the sold properties which agents are active. Like, it's one thing to get a listing, but it's another thing to sell the property and sell it for good money.
Yes.
So if you see that there's a particular amount of agents on $1 Million Listing Sydney who are actually selling and getting the deal done, you think, wow, they must be good at what they do.
Yes.
Number two, they must be in with all the current buyers, because if they're selling, they've got a solid contact with the people inspecting. And number three, clearly they can get it done. You don't want your property sitting. So sold results are good for not only the buyer, but they're good for the selling agents too. So Theo, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. Our second guest, was great having you. It's an honour, and we'll have you on again, I'm sure, at some time.
Thank you. Hopefully I haven't offended many people with my pessimism. but property is effectively a series of cycles.
Of course.
And people just need to be aware that we're at a stage of the cycle where the supply side of the equation is exploding.
Well, and everyone has a view as well.
Yes. And
your view is valid and everyone else's.
I've been wrong many times in my life.
Well, let's see how it turns out.
Yes.